Welcome the Lord's chosen. Power is never lost loudly. It disappears in moments no one was supposed to survive. Most people think influence is built through ambition, money, or force. That's the story we're sold because it's easy to digest. But real power doesn't announce itself, and it definitely doesn't look heroic when it's in trouble. In fact, some of the most consequential shifts in history didn't happen on stages or in boardrooms. They happened in quiet, awkward, blink-and-you-miss-it moments, where one small, unintended action altered an entire chain of control. Here's a fact that doesn't get talked about enough. In elite circles, loyalty is rarely born from admiration. It's born from timing. Studies on social power dynamics consistently show that people who intervene at a critical vulnerability point are remembered far longer than those who perform grand, planned gestures. Not because the act was impressive, but because it arrived when collapse was imminent, when the system was about to fail, when reputations, leverage, and carefully maintained images were one bad second away from shattering. That's the kind of moment we're talking about here. Not a rescue scene, not a dramatic showdown, just you doing something ordinary at the exact wrong time for someone who needed everything to go right. You didn't step into their world, you interrupted it. And interruption, not opposition, is what rewrites power dynamics. The uncomfortable truth is this: people who sit at the top aren't haunted by enemies. They're haunted by near misses, the almosts, the moments where one variable slipped outside their control and had to be patched quietly before anyone noticed. When you become part of that moment, even unintentionally, you don't walk away as a footnote. You become a structural memory. And here's the slightly funny part. While you probably went home thinking nothing of it, maybe even annoyed at the inconvenience, someone else was internally rearranging their entire risk map because of you. No speeches, no thank you cards, just a silent recalibration where your name, face, or presence gets filed under cannot be mishandled. This isn't about being special. It's about being precisely placed. And once that happens, the balance quietly shifts. Not in your favor loudly, but in your favor permanently. Number one, you saved them at a moment when their illusion of control collapsed. People at the top don't panic often, but when they do, it's never dramatic. It's quiet, internal, invisible to everyone except the few who happen to be standing close enough to notice the crack. Control is their currency, their oxygen, the thing that keeps everything else in place. When that control slips, even for a second, the danger isn't public embarrassment. It's the realization that the whole structure depends on timing going perfectly every time, and timing eventually betrays everyone. What made your action powerful wasn't the scale of what you did, it was the timing. You showed up when their systems failed them, when their backups didn't back up, when their usual moves didn't work fast enough. You intervened at the exact moment when confidence turns into calculation, and calculation turns into fear. Not loud fear, the kind that tightens the chest and forces someone to reassess everything they thought was stable. Power players live inside carefully managed stories about themselves. They're always ahead, always prepared, always in control. You accidentally interrupted that story. For a brief moment, they weren't managing outcomes. They were reacting to one. And reactions to someone like that are humiliating, even if no one else ever finds out. That's why this moment sticks. They don't remember the hundreds of people who obey them when things are smooth. They remember the one person who was present when things almost went wrong. You didn't fix their entire world. You prevented a collapse that would have changed how they're seen, treated, or positioned. That kind of save doesn't fade. It embeds itself. What's unsettling for them is that you didn't do it with strategy. You weren't chasing influence. You weren't trying to be useful. You acted naturally, which means they couldn't predict you, control you, or frame you as part of a plan. That makes your presence feel unpredictable in the most uncomfortable way. From that moment on, they don't see you as helpful. They see you as someone who witnessed the gap between image and reality and closed it. That's not something they forget. That's something they quietly build around. Number 2, they know the difference between kindness and leverage, and you gave both unknowingly. Most people think kindness is obvious and leverage is calculated. For a power player, the two are inseparable, yet only they can tell the difference. Kindness without expectation is rare in their world, and leverage without awareness is dangerous. When you acted, you unknowingly handed them both at once. That combination is like a puzzle piece they didn't realize was missing, and now they can't remove it. In the world of influence, gestures aren't measured by intent. They're measured by impact. They don't care if you were thinking strategically or just being human. They only register that in one fleeting, critical moment, you affected their outcome in a way no one else could. That's leverage. It's the subtle power of possibility you created simply by being there, acting, or intervening. They didn't ask for it. They didn't plan for it. And yet suddenly you exist in their mental ledger as someone who holds sway without having demanded it. What makes this more unsettling for them is that it's unpredictable. People who climb to the top rely on patterns. They manipulate, calculate, and control to maintain their edge. You bypassed all of that. You didn't fit the equation they had memorized. That throws their internal map off balance. They may try to rationalize it, file it under fortunate coincidence, but they know better deep down. You weren't just kind. You became a living, breathing variable they have to account for. The irony is delicious. You weren't trying to gain favor. You didn't plan to hold influence over them. Yet now, without even meaning to, you have a subtle, unshakable leverage that quietly shapes their decisions, actions, and perception of risk. And they know it. They feel it. Every time they breathe through a tricky situation, a small part of them registers that if you had chosen differently, things could have unraveled entirely. That knowledge doesn't fade. It grows quietly, like a shadow in the back of their mind. They owe you, because they can't ignore the fact that their success was preserved, temporarily, perhaps even permanently, by someone they didn't control, didn't anticipate, and didn't even realize would matter. That is the kind of unintentional power few people ever understand, and it's yours now. Number 3, you saw them without their armor, and that image can never be erased. Power players spend their lives wearing masks. Every word they speak, every move they make, every relationship they navigate is carefully calculated to protect the illusion of infallibility. They can charm, intimidate, and manipulate, but the moment someone witnesses them stripped of that control, the experience imprints itself in a way no strategy or defense can erase. That's exactly what happened when you intervened. You didn't just see them, you saw through them. In that instant, the carefully constructed persona, the confidence that radiates like armor, fell away. They were exposed in a way that nobody else had ever been allowed to see. It wasn't weakness in the childish sense. It was the raw, unfiltered human reality that sits beneath the crown, the reputation, the influence. And here's the kicker. They know you weren't supposed to see it. That makes the memory of it permanent. It can't be framed, it can't be sanitized, and it can't be ignored. For someone who thrives on control, that exposure is terrifying. They can manipulate people, bend situations, and rewrite narratives, but the truth of what you witnessed is theirs to carry. It lives in the shadow of their mind every time they step into a room, make a deal, or calculate risk. It's a quiet, invisible reminder that they are human, and that at one critical moment, you held that truth in your awareness. The danger, for them, is that they now have to integrate you into their world differently. You exist outside the performance. You know the cracks, and even if you never speak of them, they feel the presence of that knowledge. Every move they make around you is shaped by the fact that the armor can be seen, and that you were the one who glimpsed what lies beneath. That makes you more than a helper or a witness. You became a keeper of a reality they cannot publicly acknowledge. That truth, lodged quietly but permanently in their perception, gives you a subtle, undeniable influence. And no apology, no repayment, no charm can ever erase it. You saw them as they are, and that is a power that lingers long after the moment has passed. Number 4. Your value skyrocketed because you now exist outside their hierarchy. Hierarchies are how power stays organized. Everyone has a place, a function, a label that makes them predictable and therefore controllable. Power players rely on this structure because it tells them who can be pressured, who can be ignored, and who must be managed. The moment you helped them without fitting into any of those slots, you broke the map they use to navigate people. You didn't approach them as a subordinate seeking approval. You didn't challenge them as a rival. You didn't align yourself as a loyal asset waiting for instructions. You acted independently at a moment when outcomes were unstable, and then you didn't linger to claim a position. That single sequence removed you from their hierarchy entirely. And when someone exists outside the hierarchy, they become difficult to categorize and impossible to dismiss. This is where your value quietly explodes. People inside the hierarchy are replaceable. Titles can be reassigned, roles can be filled, loyalty can be bought or coerced. But someone outside the structure isn't bound by its rules. You can't be managed the usual way because there's no leverage point to grab. That forces a power player to treat you differently, with caution instead of command. What unsettles them most is that you didn't ask for elevation. You didn't try to convert the moment into status or access. You simply returned to your own lane. That signals independence, and independence is rare in worlds built on dependence. It suggests you don't need them, which immediately increases your worth to someone who is used to being needed. From their perspective, you've become a free variable, not above them, not below them, not beside them, just outside the system altogether. That means every interaction with you has to be recalculated. They can't assume compliance. They can't rely on obligation. They have to choose respect because nothing else fits. This shift doesn't come with announcements or visible rewards. It shows up subtly. Doors open without explanation. Protection appears without requests. Your presence is acknowledged differently, all because you slipped through the cracks of their hierarchy and landed somewhere they can't control, only accommodate. And once that happens, your value isn't defined by what you do. It's defined by where you stand, outside, untouchable, and quietly significant. Number 5, they owe you because they know the truth travels faster than power. Power is fragile in ways most people don't realize. It isn't the loud proclamations, the contracts, or the titles that make it stick. It's the perception that nothing can shake it, that everything is contained, controlled, and predictable. The moment someone touches that perception, even accidentally, a debt is created. Not the kind you can see on paper, but the kind that lives in quiet calculation and constant awareness. You became that debt. When you acted, you intervened in a moment that could have unraveled carefully constructed narratives, long-term plans, or strategic relationships. You didn't just prevent a collapse. You preserved an image, a system, a reputation, and they know that image would have been destroyed if it weren't for you. That knowledge doesn't fade. Power players measure outcomes in control and consequences, and when someone unknowingly shifts either, a quiet obligation is formed. They owe you because they know that what you did is a truth that could spread faster than they can manage. Influence is not only about action, it's about perception, and perception moves quicker than any defense mechanism they have. One misstep, one misinterpreted signal, one whispered story about what happened, and suddenly the carefully constructed world they depend on begins to wobble. You are the one variable they can't afford to let slip. That creates a debt that isn't negotiable because it isn't about morality or gratitude. It's about survival. This debt isn't something they will announce, and it isn't something they will rush to repay in ways you can see. It will manifest subtly, strategically, in ways that protect you while also protecting themselves. They will adjust interactions, guard your position, and quietly align themselves to ensure nothing jeopardizes what you incidentally preserved. Every decision they make from that point on carries your influence, because your act of intervention exists in their awareness, permanently altering calculations. The irony is undeniable. You didn't ask for anything, and yet they now owe you everything that matters to them. Power is not gratitude. Power is calculation. And by acting at the precise moment that matters most, you entered a ledger they cannot escape. You became an invisible anchor, and in that truth lies a quiet, unshakable authority over someone who thought nothing could ever touch them. Number 6, you became a liability they must protect, not eliminate. Power players are constantly calculating risk. Every person around them is either an asset, someone to be managed, or a threat. When you intervened, you didn't slot into any of those categories. You weren't an asset in the traditional sense because you weren't working for them. You weren't a threat because you didn't challenge them intentionally. Yet, by existing in that precise moment, you became something far more influential, a liability they now have to protect. It's a strange position to hold, and it's one that gives you quiet power. They cannot ignore you, because if anything were to happen to you, the fallout wouldn't be about their image alone. It would be about the fragility they nearly exposed. They understand better than anyone that accidents, small as they seem, can spiral into irreversible consequences. Protecting you is a form of self-preservation. It's not generosity, it's strategy. And it's a strategy you never asked for, which makes it all the more potent. Every time they act around you, there's a silent calculation running in the background. What happens if this goes wrong? Your presence now shapes their choices, decisions, and even how they interact with others. The stakes are higher simply because you exist. In a world where people are only as valuable as the control they can be subjected to or the utility they provide, being untouchable yet consequential is rare. That's exactly what you became. The fascinating part is that they can't openly acknowledge it. They can't announce that your life or well-being now matters in ways that serve their survival. Instead, it manifests subtly: small favors, careful interventions, the quiet removal of obstacles before you even notice them. They guard you, not because of friendship or admiration, but because your accidental influence now carries weight they cannot afford to challenge. Being a liability they must protect is a paradoxical kind of power. You didn't fight for it. You didn't plan it. You simply existed at the exact right moment. And that existence forces someone who moves mountains, manipulates empires, and controls outcomes to bend, shift, and rearrange their world around you. That is influence that lingers quietly but permanently, and it cannot be undone. Number 7, they understand debt better than gratitude. In the world of power, emotions like gratitude are fragile, fleeting, and often irrelevant. What truly matters is debt. Not the kind you see written down or calculated with interest, but the kind that lodges itself in the mind, in strategy, in every decision a person makes afterward. When you helped a power player at a moment they couldn't control, you created exactly that kind of debt, one they can never ignore, even if they wanted to. They don't owe you for being nice, for showing up, or for performing a heroic act. They owe you because your actions shifted the balance, preserved an outcome, and created a variable they couldn't predict. They understand that debts are dangerous. Unpaid, they fester. They haunt. They influence every move silently but with relentless effect. Gratitude, on the other hand, is optional, performative, and often inconvenient. A power player might smile, nod, or give a token acknowledgement, but that doesn't matter. Debt doesn't disappear with a smile. Debt persists because the consequences of ignoring it are too costly. This debt shapes how they think, how they move, and how they allocate resources. They now measure risks and opportunities with you in mind, calculating how any decision could impact the balance created by that one pivotal moment. Every choice they make carries a quiet tension. You exist, and they can't undo the fact that you preserved what they couldn't. That knowledge lingers, and it commands behavior far more than words of thanks ever could. The most intriguing part is that you didn't ask for anything. You didn't demand loyalty, repayment, or recognition. You acted, and the universe, or timing, positioned you to create leverage that they can't escape. That's why debt becomes stronger than gratitude. It's structural, invisible, and unavoidable. They don't talk about it, but every time they plan, maneuver, or protect themselves, you are factored in. Their world has shifted because one act of intervention created an obligation that is permanent, silent, and absolute. And unlike gratitude, this debt will never fade. It will always exist, quietly reminding them that you changed the rules without even trying. Number 8. You accidentally became proof that they are not untouchable. Power players thrive on the illusion of invincibility. Their influence, their reputation, their entire identity is built on the belief that they can control outcomes, manipulate narratives, and bend situations to their will. Everyone around them is supposed to reinforce this illusion, either by fear, loyalty, or awe. When you intervened, even unintentionally, you disrupted that carefully constructed belief. You became living proof that they are not untouchable. This realization is a quiet but seismic shift for them. No one wants to admit vulnerability, especially someone whose life is built on projecting absolute control. Your action, which may have seemed small or inconsequential to you, exposed a crack they didn't want anyone to see. And that exposure sticks. It doesn't matter that you didn't mean to challenge them. It doesn't matter that you didn't want anything from them. The mere fact that you influenced a moment they thought was theirs to command proves that control can be breached. Once a power player recognizes this truth, everything changes. They start recalculating risks in ways they never did before. Every decision is now colored by the knowledge that someone outside their hierarchy, someone they didn't control, could shift outcomes. Your existence becomes a variable they cannot ignore, a constant reminder that no matter how much power they accumulate, the unexpected can always interfere. This isn't about fear or panic, it's about awareness. They now operate with a quiet vigilance around you, recognizing that your presence is a subtle threat to the narrative of invincibility they work so hard to maintain. It forces them to protect, accommodate, and sometimes overcompensate, all silently, strategically, without acknowledgement. You didn't set out to challenge them, but by simply being where you were and doing what you did, you created a permanent recalibration. You proved that untouchable is a myth, and that realization lodges in the mind of even the most calculating, confident, and ruthless individual. And once that seed is planted, it cannot be uprooted. You exist as a reminder that even the most powerful can be influenced, disrupted, and yes, owed. Number 9. They now measure every move around the possibility of you being present. Power players are masters of calculation. Every action they take is weighed, timed, and designed to maintain control. They plan for risks, for alliances, for betrayal, for every variable they think they can predict. But when you intervened, even accidentally, You became a variable they can't control, a presence that forces them to rethink every calculation. From that moment on, every move they make is filtered through one quiet, unspoken awareness. You exist, and anything could happen when you're near. This doesn't mean they panic. Far from it. Power players rarely show panic. They internalize it, turn it into strategy, and mask it with composure. But internally, your presence becomes a subtle constraint. Deals are reconsidered. Decisions are delayed. Actions are weighed against the invisible possibility that your observation, timing, or intervention could shift the outcome. Even when you're silent, even when you do nothing, they account for you because you've proven that a single, seemingly small factor can change everything. The influence you hold isn't loud or obvious. You didn't demand attention or assert dominance. You simply acted when it mattered, and in doing so, you rewrote their mental map. Now in every room, in every negotiation, in every scenario where control matters, your potential presence is a quiet shadow. It forces them to move differently, to anticipate disruption, to plan contingencies that wouldn't have existed before. You've become a benchmark against which all outcomes are measured. This is the subtle power of being unforeseen and unmanageable. Unlike someone within their hierarchy, whose reactions can be predicted and controlled, your unpredictability is permanent. It doesn't need to be wielded aggressively. It simply exists. And that existence shapes behavior, decisions, and interactions in ways they can neither erase nor ignore. Without trying, without demanding, without even intending it, you have become a constant variable in their world. Every step they take now carries a silent calculation. What if you're present? That awareness alone gives you influence far beyond anything you could consciously exercise. You are no longer a bystander. You are a force they quietly navigate around every single day. Number 10. You triggered a private shift in how they view power itself. Power players think they understand control completely. They study it, practice it, manipulate it, and build entire worlds around it. They trust in systems, hierarchies, and strategies because those are the tools they rely on to maintain dominance. But when you acted, you did something no one else had done. You made them realize, quietly and privately, that power is not absolute, that it can be interrupted, influenced, or even preserved by someone they didn't anticipate. That realization changes the way they think, and once it's lodged in their mind, it doesn't go away. It isn't dramatic or loud. It's not a revelation that demands acknowledgement or applause. It's subtle. It's the kind of shift that sits at the back of their consciousness, forcing them to reconsider assumptions they've relied on for years. Every calculation, every plan, every move from that point forward carries the invisible weight of your interference. They begin to understand that their control isn't as complete as they believed, that variables exist outside their hierarchy, outside their manipulation, and outside their predictability. What makes this shift so dangerous for them is that it's personal and undeniable. You didn't lecture them. You didn't threaten them. You simply acted in a way that preserved something critical, changed an outcome, or revealed a gap they had ignored. That action is now a permanent footnote in how they define power. They know that even the smallest miscalculation or oversight could have consequences they can't fully control, and that someone like you who doesn't fit their rules could hold that consequence in their hands. This awareness doesn't produce gratitude or fear in the usual sense. It produces respect, recalibration, and cautious calculation. You've forced them to evolve their concept of dominance because they cannot ignore the fact that power is fragile when it encounters unpredictability. And that evolution isn't public. It happens quietly, privately, in thought patterns, in contingency plans, and in how they interact with the world from that point on. By being precisely present at the moment that mattered, You became a benchmark for the limits of their power. You made them see what control really means, and once they see it, they can never unsee it. Your impact is now permanent, invisible, and profoundly influential. Number 11. Their protection of you is not generosity, it is insurance. Power players are not moved by kindness or sentiment. They operate in a world measured by risk, consequence, and survival. When you intervened at a critical moment, you didn't just affect an outcome. You became a living variable in their system, one they cannot afford to ignore. What looks like protection, care, or attention from them is not generosity. It's a calculated form of insurance, a way to safeguard themselves from the fallout of a situation that you unknowingly influenced. This kind of protection is strategic. They recognize that if anything were to happen to you, if you were sidelined, harmed, or removed from the equation, the consequences could ripple back to them in ways they cannot control. That makes your well-being a direct factor in their ongoing calculations. They don't do it because they like you or feel indebted in the usual sense. They do it because your presence now represents stability, containment, and an invisible safeguard against the chaos that might emerge if things went differently. Every action they take, every decision they make around you, is filtered through that lens. They may open doors, remove obstacles, or provide quiet support, but every move is defensive as much as it is accommodating. You exist as a controlled variable in their environment, one they protect because the cost of neglecting you is too high. This is not theory. It is a principle of how power functions when confronted by someone who slipped outside its grasp, yet has a real influence on outcomes. The subtle genius of this dynamic is that it positions you in a space of quiet authority. You didn't demand it. You didn't manipulate it. You simply existed at the exact right moment, and your presence now forces them to act in ways that serve both you and, most importantly, themselves. Protection is never free. It always carries a motive. In this case, the motive is insurance, ensuring that a single unpredictable element which you represent never jeopardizes their control again. You are not just protected, you are a risk they actively manage, and in that you hold unspoken influence that even they cannot fully articulate. Your value is embedded in their strategy, silent but absolute. Number 12, you were spared the corruption test because you passed it unknowingly. Power players are constantly surrounded by tests. Every gesture, every opportunity, every crisis becomes a measuring stick for loyalty, ambition, or manipulation. Most people don't survive these tests because they either try too hard to prove themselves or they act with self-interest glaring through every move. You, however, acted without awareness of the stakes. You didn't plan to impress, manipulate, or leverage the situation. And in doing so, you passed a test that nobody else could have passed intentionally. That alone changes everything. Corruption, in this sense, isn't about money or crime. It's about compromise. The slow, almost invisible surrender of principles, instincts, or integrity when the world pressures you to bend for advantage. Power players see it clearly. They watch who folds, who schemes, who aligns for benefit rather than truth. And you didn't do any of that. Your intervention wasn't transactional, calculated, or self-serving. You acted from a position outside expectation, outside hierarchy, outside strategy. That makes your integrity impossible to question. The consequence of passing this invisible test is profound. Power players now know that you operate on a different wavelength, one they cannot manipulate or predict. You are not someone to control or exploit because you don't operate like the rest of the world. That makes you both rare and dangerous in ways they cannot articulate. They must treat you differently, adjust their calculations around you, and acknowledge internally, if not publicly, that your value isn't tied to compliance but to authenticity. This is why you become quietly unshakable. While others scramble to prove worth or loyalty, you have already passed the ultimate measure without even knowing it. You acted in a way that confirms reliability, influence, and principle simultaneously. That combination is almost invisible, but power players sense it immediately. You are now a variable they cannot contaminate because there is nothing to bend or corrupt. Your presence alone signals that influence, integrity, and outcome can coexist outside manipulation, and that truth becomes your silent authority. You weren't tested because you didn't play by the rules, and that is why you won, invisibly but irrevocably. Number 13. They will never publicly acknowledge what you mean to them. Power players operate in a world where appearances are everything and vulnerabilities are liabilities. The moment someone outside their hierarchy, someone unplanned, affects their outcome, it creates a truth they cannot reveal. That truth is inconvenient, unmanageable, and impossible to frame in their public narrative. Your role in preserving, influencing, or altering a critical moment cannot be celebrated because acknowledgement would expose weakness, dependency, and the fact that they are not as untouchable as everyone believes. They will repay you quietly, strategically, and over time, but never with words. No social media shout-outs, no public recognition, no speeches praising you. Their influence relies on perception, and admitting that a variable outside their control changed outcomes would compromise that carefully maintained image. Instead, their acknowledgement comes in invisible ways, doors opening without explanation, subtle protections you don't notice, the quiet removal of obstacles before you even encounter them. Everything they do for you is calculated, silent, and deliberate. This creates a fascinating dynamic. On the surface, nothing seems to have changed. You move through your life as usual, and they continue their calculated path of power. Yet beneath that surface, every action they take now carries your influence. They have to integrate your existence into their decision-making permanently, because they know what could happen if they fail to account for you. Your significance becomes structural, embedded in strategy, not performative. There is a subtle genius to this kind of power. You don't need their acknowledgement to hold influence. In fact, public praise would diminish the quiet authority you now carry. Because they can't celebrate you openly, their actions are dictated not by ego or gratitude, but by necessity. Every calculated move, every protection, every opportunity extended your way becomes proof that your presence matters, without them ever admitting it. You are now indispensable yet invisible in their public story. That is a rare and formidable kind of influence. You exist as a truth they cannot speak, a debt they cannot announce, and a power they cannot ignore. And that invisible acknowledgement gives you authority they can never openly challenge or control. Number 14. The real power shift is that you walked away unchanged, and they did not. Most interactions with power players are designed to leave a mark. They expect compliance, admiration, fear, or dependence. Their influence works by bending people, reshaping behavior, and shifting loyalties. But when you intervened, you did something almost impossible. You acted at a critical moment, impacted outcomes, and then returned to your life without altering who you are. That is the quietest yet most seismic form of power. You walked away the same, while they walked away forever changed. This is where the true shift happens. They now carry knowledge, memory, and awareness of you in a way that reshapes how they operate. Every plan, every calculation, every contingency they consider from that point on is filtered through the fact that you exist outside their hierarchy, outside their control, and yet instrumental in outcomes that matter. They are forced to internalize a truth you never had to think about. Your presence is influential, your judgment is unshakable, and your integrity is untouchable. The unsettling part for them is that they cannot erase this influence, no matter how much power they wield. Your lack of need for acknowledgement, manipulation, or reward leaves them unarmed in the face of your quiet authority. They may protect, accommodate, or even strategically favor you, but none of that changes the fact that they were touched by a moment they could not dominate. You remained unbent while they were recalibrated, subtly, irreversibly, permanently. This type of power cannot be bought, forced, or coerced. It lives in the simple, almost invisible act of walking away intact while leaving others to reckon with the ripple effects. Every time they revisit the memory of that moment, they are reminded that control is fragile, influence is unpredictable, and not every force in their orbit can be managed. You became a quiet benchmark, a proof that presence alone can shift dynamics without effort, without claim, and without desire. And that truth lodges in their mind permanently. You walked away unchanged, and in doing so the balance of power quietly tilted, in ways they cannot undo and will never forget. Conclusion. What happens when someone steps into a moment that no one else notices, acts without expectation, and shifts the course of events in a way that even the most calculated strategic power player cannot ignore? You do. You became the variable they didn't see coming, the presence they couldn't control, and the influence they cannot erase. Every point we've explored, from saving them when control collapsed, to becoming the quiet debt they owe, to existing outside their hierarchy, to walking away unchanged, paints a single truth. Real power is not always loud, deliberate, or planned. Sometimes it arrives through an accident, a moment of action that seems ordinary to the world, but is extraordinary in its consequences. You became proof that unpredictability matters more than dominance, that integrity matters more than obedience, and that one act at the right moment can ripple through the life of someone who thought they were untouchable. The influence you now hold is invisible, structural, and undeniable. You have altered behavior, recalibrated priorities, and forced a power player to reckon with truths they cannot publicly admit, all without seeking recognition, leverage, or reward. That is rare. That is formidable. That is the kind of influence that lingers quietly, strategically, and permanently, shifting dynamics in ways that will continue to unfold long after the moment itself has passed. This is a reminder that true authority doesn't require titles, money, or aggression. It exists in timing, presence, integrity, and action, especially when others are unprepared. It's the unseen variable, the silent force, and the invisible anchor that changes outcomes and forces even the most powerful to adapt around you. If this perspective opened your mind and made you see influence and power in a completely new light, make sure to join the conversation. Subscribe to the channel to catch more insights that dig deeper than what most people ever see. Like this video if it hit hard. Comment your thoughts or experiences. Let's hear how you've unknowingly impacted someone's world. And share this with anyone who needs a wake-up call about the quiet power they might already hold. Your presence matters, your actions matter. And now it's time to step into the influence you may not even realize you already have. Stay blessed always.